Our first reading today comes from the book of Exodus in the 24th chapter. Listen to God's word. And this is the story of Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there. And I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." So Moses set out with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. To the elders Moses had said, "Wait here for us until we come to you again. For Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute may go to them." Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, God called to Moses out of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and for 40 nights. And our gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew in the 17th chapter, beginning with verse 1. Listen again to God's word. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here with you. If you wish, I will make three dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While Peter was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on the ground and they were overcome with fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Gracious God, do grant that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts will be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I have a question for you. Where was your mountaintop experiences? We've all had them. We've all had them different times in our lives. And I'm going to share with you 3 of mine today. I visited some places where I really wish I could have stayed. And one of them is the place that I was at 2 weeks ago. People say to me, "Why do you keep going back? Have you ever been anywhere where you felt like your soul was being fed?" My soul is being fed there. I love going to that place. It's there that my soul is fed. I go to Lake Atitlan. It's a beautiful lake in Guatemala. It's surrounded by 3 volcanoes. None of them are active now, but everywhere you look, there's a volcano. There's beauty. There's something going on that's amazing. It's just a beautiful place. And I go there. I feed my soul. If you go in the morning and you look out, you'll see fishermen in homemade carved out wooden boats out on the lake trying to catch their fill of fish for the day. Usually they're standing up on their boat and they're paddling. Today, the lake was rough, and so it was difficult. Every once in a while, you'll see them struggling, but usually they just do that every day. This lake, because of the volcanic activity, which still exists somewhere, churns up every day, and there's times during the day where it's difficult to pass and cross on the lake. It becomes so churned up that you really can't go by. You can't go by boat. You have to stay where you are. I can remember one time when we were supposed to go, this was about 10 or 12 years ago, we were supposed to go to another village to do a domestic violence workshop, and at 5 o'clock in the morning our boat captain came and got us and said, "You must come now because we won't be able to go on the lake unless you come now." And so at 5 o'clock in the morning we had to get up and go and get across the lake so that we could get to the village to do our workshop. We arrived way, way, way early, but it was worth it. One of the things I love about this lake is when morning breaks and the sun rises. It just climbs over the volcano and suddenly it appears and the light starts to get a little bit brighter. It's quiet there. There's no phones, there's no traffic, just roosters crowing. Roosters who can't tell time because they normally start at about 3 a.m. But it's a beautiful place. I could stay there. I could stay there forever. It feeds my soul. I need to go there every couple of years just to be refreshed and renewed. And I sit there and I just take it all in and I thank God for the beauty of that place. I'll take you to another of my mountaintop experiences. It was in a hospital room. I had just become a mother. I was sitting there holding this little bundle of blue eyes. Eyes that were looking straight into mine and said things that only I could hear. I felt what was being said more clearly than anything I've ever felt in my life. I'd like to go back there. I'd like to spend some more time with those eyes. Oh, those eyes are still here now, but now they're older, and now they've seen a lifetime of things themselves. Those eyes have already had their own mountaintop experiences that are different from mine, and they're not quite sure which one was the best. But back then, only those eyes were still there. They're much older now, and they look at different things. Then, they look just at me, only me. But I could go back there, and I could stay there. Or, I could stay at another one of my mountaintop experiences, looking at the end of an aisle at a church in Jeffersonville, Indiana. People were singing, "Joyful, joyful, we adore thee." And there I stood, looking at my husband-to-be. We hadn't said "I do" yet, and I'm not sure that I was even capable of saying those words when I first looked down that aisle. But there he stood, looking at me with his own blue eyes. He looked at me and he smiled. He moved something deep down inside of me that's never been moved like that before. I wish I could go back there again. He's still my husband now, 16 years later, but now he knows. Now he knows about the flaws. Now he knows about that tad bit of stubbornness. Now he knows about my little quirks. He means more to me now than I thought anyone could ever mean to me. But I could still go back. I could still go and stand in that church forever, looking into his trust and feeling like he made me feel that day. As nice as it is here, I'd still like to go back. We all have those mountaintop experiences. And when we have them, we want to stay there. It's so wonderful that we don't ever want it to end. And that's what happened to Peter. I think Peter would have stayed there He was really serious. He wanted to build those dwellings. He wanted to be able to stay there and have Moses and Elijah and learn from them. It was like a dream come true for him. Everything he ever wanted was there on that mountaintop. Scholars today argue which mountaintop it was, but it really doesn't matter. There's really only two that it could have been, and it doesn't really matter which mountaintop it was. It happened. It happened. It was one of those times when you never want it to end. And yet those of us who've had those mountaintop experiences know that it has to end. You have to come back down from that high mountaintop and get back to the reality of life. It's not always like it is on that mountaintop. Things change. Some are good, some are bad, but things happen. And it's going on those mountaintops that give us the strength and the courage we need to face those valleys that we then go back into. You know, after Jesus was talking to Moses and Elijah, and after God proclaimed, "This is my son, the beloved, in whom I'm well pleased," listen to him. Everything came back to normal. The dazzling white was gone. Peter, James, and John must have been thinking, did that happen? Was it a dream? Have you ever woken up from a dream that was so realistic that you wondered if it really was real or not? That's had to be how they felt. And yet, immediately, Jesus started to go back down the mountain, back down to do what needed to be done. It happens that way. Some of us here have had those kinds of experiences. That time in your life when you suddenly knew who Jesus was and you found that everything in the world looked different now that you recognized him. Suddenly everything makes sense. It really makes sense. And the things that didn't make sense really didn't matter after all. And you really wished that you could stay right there. Let's go back down the mountain where all those people are wanting all that stuff. Let's not go there. Let's stay here. Let's stay up here and visit with Moses and Elijah and hear a bit more from God. Some of us never want to come back down. Coming back down from that mountain is hard. Most people don't understand what's happening up there. And yet, the more you try to explain it, the more people smile at you that smile. Yeah. Some people do understand because they've been there. But it was a long time ago and they've forgotten what it was like, or maybe it was so frightening that they decided that the trip really hadn't made any difference. We don't want to become like them. It's hard down here. It's really hard down here. There are noises that don't exist up on that mountaintop. We are asked to do things here that we're not asked to do when we're on that mountaintop. We have to make decisions down here that just never come up on that mountaintop. Some of us decide to go back to that mountaintop and stay. It's much easier. On the mountaintop, we can enjoy the rush of the experience. We can enjoy the view without being bothered by what goes on below. We aren't troubled by the valley's decisions and temptations. The mountaintop is the place to be. But things change in our lives. Marriage changes. Every day we try to look at each other with that same rosy-colored glaze in our eyes that was there on that day when we first said yes. The gaze filters out much of what has happened, and sometimes we pretend that some of it hasn't happened, but things change. We get older. Things do change. We're different people than we were that day. But that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. Because you see, living in the valley means that we get to know more and more about each other. We get to know each other at a deeper level. You know, some ministers say, "Oh, you've been at that church a long time. It must be getting easier and easier for you." It's not. It's getting harder and harder. Because I really am a part of all of your lives. I know all the valley experiences of your lives as well as the mountaintop experiences. And that makes it harder. And yet, doesn't it make it better? Doesn't it make it richer? That we know each other well enough that you can just call me and say, I need you. And I'll have some idea what you're talking about. And I'll be able to be with you. That's what it's like in our relationships. As time goes on, we come to deeper levels. It's not a bad thing. If we're willing to watch and grow, and if we strive to protect it and keep things away from change, we miss that opportunity to grow. We miss the opportunity to grow deeper and to know each other better. We can't stay on those mountaintops. I find myself at times trying to go back to that lake and see that beauty and soak it in and take a deep breath and just try to picture it in my mind so that on a bad day I remember how beautiful it is. I try to go back to that hospital room and see those eyes once again looking at me for the first time. I try to go back to Jeffersonville and see those eyes at the end of the aisle that don't know all my little quirks and idiosyncrasies and flaws. But you know, if I do that, I miss so much. I miss so much of this gift that God has given us called life. Jesus came down off that mountain with Peter, James, and John, knowing where he was heading, knowing that he was heading into the most difficult time of his life, and yet knowing how important it was for them to see it at the beginning on the top of the mountain, but also to follow him back down. You can't stay on the top of the mountain. We have to come down. There are moments of awe when we fall on our knees and we say, wow. Wow, this is amazing. And there are times when out of terror and frustration, we also scream, enough. I can't take any more. There's no reason to come back down. And yet we all know there is. We all know there is. Peter wouldn't have become who he was if he hadn't gone up on that mountain with Jesus. We wouldn't be who we are if he hadn't come back down. Go up the mountains. We all need that. But we all also need to come down. May it be so for you and for me.